Siberia, June 1908. A vast land where the wind still speaks in the language of fire and silence. The taiga stretched endlessly, dark green, unmoving. But that morning, the sky was no longer a friend. Near the Podkamanaya Tunguska River, a hunter named Seaman Chekaran heard a sound. Not thunder, a roar deep, as if the earth itself groaned. Then light, not sunlight, but another sun. They said the sky opened, and fire fell. The light lasted nearly a minute, long enough to twist the shadows of trees, bright enough that people in England could read newspapers at midnight. Then, explosion. A wind of fire swept through the forest. 80 million trees collapsed in the same direction. The ground shook, a force equal to 30 megatons of TNT. But there was no crater, no meteor, nothing. A blast without a body, a wound without a bullet. The shockwave circled the earth 3 times, and still, no one could say what had happened. 13 years later, Leonid Kulik came searching. No crater, only blackened trees, standing upright like burned sentinels. He wrote, "I feel as if I stand on a testing ground for a weapon not made by man." And far away, on Long Island, a man named Nikola Tesla wrote in his journal, "Energy transmitted through the air. Reaction uncontrolled. Frequency exceeded. June 30th, 1908. The same day the sky exploded. Maybe it wasn't from the stars. Maybe it was sent from Earth. At dawn, the forest was silent. Too silent. For miles, trees lay flattened. Those still standing were stripped bare, blackened pillars among the ashes. The air smelled of metal. The ground hummed, faint, rhythmic, alive. Days passed. Nights glowed blue across Europe. People in London read under midnight light. The world had no name for it. 2 decades later, Kulik returned. He wrote, "The compass spins. The soil is cold yet burned. And at night, the air sings." He found no meteor, no impact, no answer. Only a pattern. Trees radiating from an unseen center. In America, Tesla's notebooks spoke of wireless power, a dream to transmit energy through the earth itself. One note, half burned, read, "To send power through the air, one must first speak to thunder." Was it a metaphor or a warning? Kulik died never knowing. But the hum remained. Compasses faltered. Cameras glitched. And sometimes, the forest still whispered. From an old letter, signed N. Tesla, "If ever the world should hear a sound too great for its own understanding, know that it is not destruction, but the language of energy itself." Maybe Tesla didn't destroy Siberia. Maybe he awakened it. Silence is not absence, it is memory. The fire had died, but the sky refused to go dark. For weeks, nights in Siberia glowed blue. Even in London, people read newspapers at midnight. Scientists called it noctilucent clouds. But the light pulsed, faint, rhythmic. 50 years later, Soviet engineers found a signal, a pulse repeating 8.1 hertz. A heartbeat, buried in the sky. It matched a file marked Wardenclyffe 1908. One engineer wrote, "It sounds alive, like someone trying to speak through electricity." The data was locked away, forgotten. Then, in 1976, a weather station in Omsk heard something. At 2 a.m. each night, static, then a voice. 5 words, repeated 3 times. It was not from above. It was not from above. It was not from above. When replayed, a hum lingered beneath the voice. 8.1 hertz. The same pulse. If natural, why only on the anniversary? A burned note in Tesla's papers read, "The sky listens." So maybe the question was never what fell, but what answered. Maybe Tunguska was a conversation, a signal sent, and a reply returned. Even now, the forest hums, and once a year, the pulse begins again. It was not from above. The snow had melted early that year. In the valley of Tunguska, the river ran darker than usual, a color between ash and iron. It had been 19 years since the day the sky burned. Now Leonid Kulik stood again at the edge of the forest. He was older, slower, but his eyes still carried the same question. He had come back, not to solve a mystery, but to see if it would speak to him again. The local guides refused to follow. They said the forest had changed. That at night, the trees whispered like people. Kulik smiled, wrote something in his notebook, and walked ahead. The ground was soft, layered with moss and fallen needles. Every step sank. At first, it was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no wind, not even insects. Then, about 20 kilometers in, they reached a clearing. The trees there had not regrown. A perfect circle, maybe 200 meters across, still bare, still gray, still dead. And yet, the air above it shimmered, like heat rising from a road. One of the men dropped his compass. The needle spun, stopped, then spun again. Then spun again. Kulik knelt, pressed his ear to the ground. He heard it faint, deep, almost like breathing. "Do you hear that?" he asked. The others shook their heads. He smiled again, quietly, as if an old friend had whispered his name. At night they made camp, near the edge of the clearing. The fire burned weakly. The smoke did not rise, it hung, swirling in the still air. One of the younger men, Alexei, could not sleep. He said he kept seeing flashes between the trees. White, blue, then nothing. Kulik told him it was lightning, but there were no clouds. The next morning, Alexei was gone. No footprints. No sign of struggle. Just his journal, lying open beside the fire. Its last line still wet with ink. "The forest is humming again." Kulik closed the book. He did not speak. He simply looked up, toward a sky that no longer felt empty. Then he said, almost to himself, "We are standing inside the echo." By the third day, they began to notice the silence was changing. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, a silence that pressed against the skin, as if the air itself were listening. When they spoke, the sound seemed to fall to the ground, swallowed by something unseen. The compass no longer worked. The clock hands slowed, then stopped. Cameras refused to focus. One of the men, Anton, swore he could hear a ringing, just beyond the edge of hearing, a faint tone, rising and falling, like breathing through metal. Kulik told him to write everything down. He wanted data, not fear. But that night, even Kulik stopped writing. The fire would not light. The matches sparked, but no flame would hold. So they sat in the dark, listening. And from far away, deep inside the forest, came a sound, a long, low pulse, too slow for thunder, too deep for wind. It rolled through the ground, up their spines, into their teeth. Anton whispered, "It feels alive." "We cadastry." No one answered. At dawn, the sound was gone, but the air smelled of ozone, sharp and metallic. Kulik returned to the clearing. He placed a metal rod into the soil and connected it to his galvanometer. The needle jumped once, twice, then began to oscillate. 8.1 hertz. He froze. It was the same frequency he had seen in a classified Soviet file years before. He looked up at the sky, empty, blue, silent, and wrote in his notebook, "It's still here." The pulse never stopped. That night, something strange happened. A faint glow appeared over the clearing, not bright, but steady, blue-white, the color of ice. It cast no shadow. It had no source. One of the men took a step forward, reaching out his hand. Kulik stopped him. "Don't," he said. "It's not light, it's memory." The glow flickered once, then vanished. In the morning, they found the metal rod blackened, melted halfway into the earth. Anton packed his things. He said he would walk back alone. Kulik didn't stop him. Somehow, he already knew Anton wouldn't make it. They searched for Anton for 2 days. No trail. No prints. No sound. No sound. No sound. No sound. On the morning of the 3rd, Kulik found something half buried beneath the roots of a fallen tree. It was a notebook. Anton's. The cover was damp, the pages stiff with frost. The first half was his usual writing, clean, methodical, careful measurements, sketches of soil layers. But halfway through, the handwriting changed. Different pressure, different rhythm. The words no longer made sense. They are under the ground. The hum is breathing. The light remembers the shape of sound. Each phrase written over and over, as if he had run out of language. Then, a final page. A symbol. A circle with lines radiating outward, not drawn, but burned into the paper. When Kulik touched it, the paper was warm. He turned to the others. Their faces were pale. No one spoke. That night, a storm moved through the valley. No lightning, just wind, low and constant, like the sea heard from underground. Kulik tried to record it on his phonograph cylinder, but when he played it back, there was no wind, only a slow, rhythmic pulse. 8.1 hertz, the same as before. On the last night of the expedition, they decided to leave, but the forest did not want them to. The air thickened. Every breath felt heavy. They carried Anton's notebook in a metal case, hoping to bring it back to the institute. When they reached the tree line, one of the men dropped the case. It hit the ground and burst open. The notebook was gone. Only ash remained. Kulik stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered, maybe it wasn't his to begin with. When they finally reached the village, the guides refused to speak. One of them crossed himself and said only, "You can measure the forest, but not what remembers it." Kulik never published the full report. He died 3 years later. Illness, exhaustion, or something else. But fragments of Anton's notebook appeared years later in a Soviet archive, mixed with unrelated files, mislabeled, untraceable. No one knows how they got there. The handwriting on those pages wasn't Anton's. They left the valley at dawn. No one spoke. Every step felt heavier, as if the ground itself was pulling them back. The snow began to fall again, silent, fine, endless. It covered their tracks before they could turn to look. Kulik kept the galvanometer in his pack. The needle had stopped moving days ago, but as they reached the ridge, it began to twitch. A pulse, then another. He lifted the case, pressed his ear against it. A sound, faint but unmistakable. 8.1 hertz. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he thought he heard a voice riding the frequency. Not words, a pattern. Rising, falling, breathing. He wrote in his notebook, "It's calling from below." The others urged him to move. He didn't. He took one final reading. The needle spiked, then broke clean in half. The ground beneath them trembled, just once, like something enormous turning in its sleep. They ran. When they reached the edge of the forest, the wind stopped. Behind them, the valley glowed faintly blue. No fire, no lightning, only light without source. They watched until it faded. Kulik turned to the men and said softly, "It's not finished." Weeks later, back in St. Petersburg, he developed the last glass plates from the expedition. Most were blank. One was not. A photograph of the clearing. Across the center of the image, faint lines, concentric circles, spreading outward. At the bottom, a mark no one remembered carving. 30 June, 8.1 Hertzes. Cycle 1. Kulik filed the plate, locked it away, and never spoke of it again. But the pattern continued. Every year, on the same day, seismographs in Siberia record a brief vibration, always the same frequency, always from the same coordinates. The instruments call it background noise, but the technicians who listen closely swear they can hear something beneath the pulse, a whisper. Too soft to understand. The cycle begins again, and somewhere, deep beneath the forest floor, the earth hums once more. Not loud, not angry, just remembering. It had been 116 years. The forest had grown back. The trees stood tall again, but the ground still hummed. In June of 2024, a research team from the European Space Agency recorded something strange. A pulse, faint, regular, coming not from the Earth, but from above it. 8.1 Hertz, the same frequency. The signal repeated for 20 seconds, then stopped. When the data was filtered, it revealed an echo, a reflection that did not match any known satellite. At first, they thought it was noise. Then a young analyst noticed. The pulse came from a fixed position, a dark object in polar orbit, moving opposite the rotation of the Earth. It wasn't new. In 1960, the US Air Force had detected the same object. They called it the Black Knight, an unknown satellite. No nation claimed it. For decades, it drifted, silent, patient, until now, when the data was compared to Tesla's surviving Wardenclyffe records. The frequency signature matched exactly. His formula for wireless power was not just a transmission, it was a beacon. And the beacon had been answered. In a secure meeting in Geneva, a signal reconstruction expert showed the waveform. Hidden inside the static was a pattern, a modulation Tesla used in 1908 to stabilize his resonant field. Only one line of code translated into text. Cycle 2 initiated. The room went silent. One scientist whispered, "So the first one was a test?" No one answered. Days later, the ESA station in Kiruna, Sweden, received another brief signal. A repeating tone followed by a short burst of Morse-like clicks. When decoded, the message formed 3 letters: do, end, S. Then, silence. Some say it's coincidence. Some say the Black Knight is just debris, a rock, a relic, an echo in orbit. But those who've studied the data know the truth is harder to ignore. Every year, on June 30th, the frequency returns. Sometimes faint, sometimes strong, but always from the same coordinates. The same heartbeat, the same rhythm, the same call and response. Maybe Tesla never meant to destroy. Maybe he reached further than anyone realized. Maybe the explosion in Tunguska wasn't the end of his experiment, but the beginning of a conversation that never stopped. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, Tesla once said. It only changes form. So perhaps, in some forgotten orbit, his voice still travels. Through the cold, through the static, through the silence, waiting for someone to answer. And maybe, one day, the sky will. The signal stopped. For weeks, the sky was quiet again. Then, one night, the radar over Greenland caught an echo. A single pulse, 8.1 hertz, bouncing back from something moving in polar orbit. The engineers checked the coordinates. It wasn't any satellite on record. The object was old, cold, drifting against the spin of the Earth. And from its direction, a faint transmission began. Not voice, not code, but rhythm. The same rhythm that once shook the forests of Siberia. It never stopped listening. Coming soon, the Black Knight satellite OS. The watcher above Earth, and the message it carries still.